Greetings, everyone! In today's Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition Battle Report, I will be giving you a little bit of a holiday special. The deadly Frankenorc has wandered on to our battlefield today. But before we go over the objectives, scenario, board, and all that good stuff, allow me to just give a very, very brief little narrative story of what's going on for our holiday special. Frankenorc, the nastiest orc zombie walking corpse thing you've ever seen. He smells like an orc that's rolled around in the pig pens, soiled himself, then keeled over, soiled himself again, then been dug up right out of the ground and stitched together with a river troll. He has a nasty habit of appearing every year on Hallows Eve. Why? To cause trouble! He's always looting stuff, breaking things, and stealing corpses. Why the corpses? To make himself stronger, of course. He uses the brain juices and the organs to make himself more powerful and open up strange portals to other worlds. Lord only knows what happens if you go through one of those. Anyways, it should be no surprise that that stinking Frankenorc has yet again appeared to terrorize our village. This time, I think he's got his eyes set on the old church. But we'll get him. We'll get a mob of the angry folks together in town and chase him into the tower. Then we'll burn it down, Frankenorc and all. But little does this Bretonnian village know that a far greater threat awaits them in the woodlines just beyond their village. The forces of destruction and undeath have gathered under the united eye of a Stigori Vampire that knows all too well the power that lays dormant within Frankenorc. If he could capture or convince the orc to join his side, it will usher in a new era of darkness and terror upon the world. Will the angry peasant folks purge Frankenorc from their land? Or will he be captured by the forces of destruction? We'll have to find out in this Halloween special battle report. So now that you got a little bit of an idea of who Frankenorc is, we can go over some of his custom rules for the game we're about to play. And we've written up a custom scenario to go along with him for the game. In addition to that, we have another brand new notable character that'll be coming onto the battlefield. His name is Paladin Hank Hill. Yes, this is a Dungeons & Dragons character that I used to run back in the day. Hank Hill, level 5 Paladin, special item, his Mason 5000 lawnmower. And yeah, I don't know. I always just thought it was such a funny and cool idea. I wanted to make it into a model. You know, Bretonnian's got paladins. I figured, why not? Instead of a horse, he can ride around on his little lawnmower. And yeah, I wrote up basically one fun little rule to make him different than your standard Bretonnian paladin. Everything he has rule-wise is pretty standard, but actually he has two special things. So the first one is his Mason 5000. The way that works is it is a barded Bretonnian horse in all regards. However, because it's a lawnmower, it's not really the fastest thing in the world, and it has -4 movement, so it essentially just moves as fast as anyone else on foot. I think that's kind of funny. And then in addition to that, it deals D3 impact hits on a successful charge. Yep, that's the lawn mowing capability of the Mason 5000 right there. Other than that, it is literally just your standard paladin. I gave him a enchanted shield, a sword of striking, and I think a potion of foolhardiness. That's about it. I figured the potion of foolhardiness is Hank's Alamo beer that he'll bust out during the battle at some point. The other special rule that Paladin Hank has is because in Dungeons & Dragons, basically, like, paladins can, like, actually heal people and cast, like, some magic and stuff. I wanted him to be a level 1 that knows lore of life, so he could actually kind of cast some holy magic during the battle. I wasn't really exactly sure how the fairest means of doing that would be, I basically looked at a damsel and I was like, all right, this is like 70 points. Yeah, you get the stat line and this and that. She gives magic resistance, yada yada. And I was like, let's cut that in half, do like 35 points to make him level 1. I think that also makes sense because a lot of times that's the cost point to get from level 1 to level 2 for wizards. So yeah, basically I just kind of factored that in to make him a level 1, like an extra 35 points to the base cost of a paladin. And again, this is a fun Halloween scenario. We've got a custom character here. We also have another custom character that is known as Frankenorc. And I'm going to be putting all of his stats up on the screen because I figured, you know, maybe there's a chance some of you will want to run Frankenorc in your own little Halloween scenario. So here are all the stats for Frankenorc and how he kind of operates. You can have one of your buddies play as him and kind of control him during the game. That's up to you. A lot of times I just kind of have him as an AI thing or like an objective piece for the game. But something to note with Frankenorc is I have been running this fellow for probably 4 or 5 years. Every Halloween, it's the only time he appears. He has never been killed. In fact, he always succeeds with his objective. So it's a bit of a hot shot, that Frankenorc, and we'll have to see if he can continue that on what I believe is his 5th year reappearing on Hallows Eve game of Warhammer. We also have a bit of a custom scenario to go along with Frankenorc for this game. For the most part, this is going to be like a standard battle. You will get victory points for units that you've defeated on the battlefield, but what we're going to have are some bonus-themed kind of scenario objectives that will be present, and if you can accomplish those during the game, you will get additional victory points on top of the casualties you've inflicted upon your opponent. These objectives are themed around my quick little narrative tale of our game here. So basically you've got the Bretonnian village folk. They are trying to burn some corpse piles that have been left behind across the fields of their town. These corpse piles are going to spread a plague amongst the village, and basically everyone that they can destroy will award the village people 150 victory points, and every single one that remains at the end of the game will award the forces of darkness and terror 150 victory points. Obviously, Frankenorc is the primary threat that this village is trying to deal with. They are pretty confident that he is the cause of all the strange things that have been happening as of late in their town, and maybe even the main reason that this strange amassing of beastmen and vampires and ghouls have shown up on their village. So the way that this objective works is every wound that the village can deal to Frankenorc gives them like 100 or so victory points, and then the final wound that is dealt to him will give an additional like double amount of victory points, so kind of some incentive to get that final wound in on Frankenorc if you can. And then the opposing side, the forces of darkness and terror, as I kind of already mentioned, are trying to destroy this church. The church is naturally a symbol of order and hope amongst the Bretonnian people, and thus it must be destroyed. So it has 10 wounds and it has a toughness of 6. It automatically counts as being hit by enemies in melee. If you're going to shoot at it, you get like a +1 to hit. And yeah, basically if you can get 10 wounds on it, the forces of darkness and terror will get 500 victory points. You know, a little bit of a harder objective, I'd say, than the corpse piles, so that's why it's got the bigger payout. I should also mention, too, to burn the corpse piles, you need to be within 6 inches of them. You can't have marched that turn, and the idea is if you can get within 6 inches and you aren't fighting or doing anything like that, your men can pull out some torches and light it ablaze. Anyways, going back to the forces of darkness and terror, their second objective is to either kill or capture or convince Frankenorc to join their side. Basically, they want to harness the power within Frankenorc and use it to power up their vampire bloodline abilities and magic and all that jazz. Especially on Halloween of all days, you know, the winds of magic are at their strongest on this day. So if we can harness the power of Frankenorc, there's no telling what kind of undead swarm will be conjured upon this helpless Bretonnian village. So there's a few ways that they can go about accomplishing this objective. Similar to the Bretonnian village people, they can choose to just try and kill and wound Frankenorc. They'll basically retrieve the body and do experiments on him afterwards. But yeah, anyways, they'll get only 75 victory points for each wound that they deal to him. And then the final wound will give an additional 150 victory points. The reason for this is because they have a few other ways of doing this, accomplishing this objective. That's why they have a little bit less points on that part. So what else they can do is try to convince Frankenorc to join their side. How do they do this? You need to get a character in base contact with Frankenorc during the melee phase. And when you would normally do your attack process with that character, you need to forego that and instead make a plea with the orc to join your side. This is done by passing a leadership test. If you can do it, Frankenorc will immediately join your side, and if he does this and survives the battle, you will get an extra 500 victory points. But if you do this and he dies while he's under your control, you only get 250 victory points. Again, the idea they can still kind of do some experiments on the dead body of Frankenorc if that's the case, so they get some victory points out of it. But yeah, those are all of the objectives for the battlefield. Now I would like to go over the lists for the game we're about to play. Unfortunately, this is going to be a little bit more of a sloppy presentation for lists. My time's a little bit crunched this week due to the holiday and everything, going back and visiting family, so I won't be able to do like the points and everything, but just to give a quick little summary of how we did this battle and the lists were structured. My opponent basically had 750 points of like a AI army that he would be commanding. I already like made that in advance. Then he made a 500 point list of Stigori Vampires. A lot of these guys are gonna look like beastmen, but like we're kind of doing little proxies and stuff. He wants to like build a vampire beastman hybrid undead army at some point, so we're kind of just using these as unit fillers in a game to test that out. But anyways, he's going to take 500 points of his own little vampire Stigori force, and in addition to that, he will have the Frankenorc spider. It's like 200, 300 points in the book. So that'll make up about 1,500 points. I just kind of merged it together into one list here. My other friend that's playing on his team is going to have a 500 point undead force. It'll have about like 20 grave guard, some zombies, and like a vampire thrall. All of the heroes in the smaller point lists, we went over the normal percentages that are allowed, just because I thought 25% was going to be a little bit too small. We wanted to build like kind of cool, either badass monsters or cool Slayer characters to take on the monsters, so I figured I'd let everyone get a couple extra points in on their characters. Anyways, those are both of the lists for the forces of darkness and terror, and we'll move on to my lists now. So kind of similar to my opponent, I had a 750 point peasant mob that I kind of designed to be like this AI force I'll be commanding. And instead of doing a 500 point list to accompany it like my opponent did, I did a 750 point Slayer force. So together that'll make up 1,500 points. Basically, I don't have like an Frankenorc spider thing on my side. Instead, we just have like some extra guys. Anyways, those are the primary lists for my side, and my 500 point reinforcement list is going to be the actual Knights of the Realm and their Paladin and a couple of Grail Knights showing up as reinforcements later in the battle. Turns out, for once, the peasants were at the front line here, and the Knights were late to the show, so kind of interesting. But anyways, those are both of the lists. Now let's go over the battlefield. We've got a road going right through the middle of town, not really doing anything actual rule-wise, just cool and a scenic thing. What it does have is a lot of fences along the edges of the road, which could affect cavalry or units that decide to take defensive positioning around there. I have a bit of a sunken in remnants of an old tower on my side of the board. My opponent has a ruined building on his side of the board. Both of those will obscure line of sight, giving cover for units if they're getting shot at or magic, whatever. And in the center bottom of the board is the old tower that Frankenorc is hiding out in. We allow 10 models per floor because it's, a big building to occupy that tower. Additionally, to charge up to the top floor where Frankenorc is, takes 10 extra inches of movement. I believe it's 5 extra inches per floor if you want to move up it. We did that just because we didn't want anyone being able to blitz right up there on the first or second turn. Figured it should take a little bit of time, and yeah, I think that makes sense. It's also, you got a big unit of guys. Probably going to be a little bit awkward to get them all through there, and should slow you down a little bit. Anyways, in the actual center of the board, directly, like, kind of in a straight line from the tower, is the chapel. I already mentioned in the objective part of the battle report here, the forces of darkness and terror are going to be trying to burn down that chapel, get some extra victory points. On my kind of objective side of things, you can also see 4 corpse piles that have been scattered about on the battlefield. Basically, I get to place 2, my opponent places 2. They have to be at least 15 inches from our deployment zone, 10 inches from each other. So I got 2 that are semi-easy to get to, and then 2 that are more in their territory and I'll have to fight over. If I want to grab those quickly, though, they will kind of slow me down in my advance, so I'll have to decide if that's worth it or not. We'll see. But other than that, I think that is most of the key components of this battlefield. There's a little bit of a farmstead on my opponent's side to give him a bit of cover during his initial deployment phase, and I have a little bit of a ruined marsh in the other corner of the board to do the same thing. You can also see here, we got the deployment lines kind of set up. My opponent has 2 units, his 2 big units of ghouls, and one of them is also going to be the Charnel Guard, moving up straight through the middle, or they could divert over to the tower side if he wants to go for the Frankenorc objective. And then he's got his 1 unit of Strigani on the far side where the farm and the marshland is. They are going to be accompanied by some wolves and the Gore Tusk and I think the Banshee. Basically, like, all of his little, like, strange, hard-hitting, like, fast units and stuff will be over there trying to harass my side. And then his bigger blocks are going to be heading through the center of the board and towards the tower. Or at least I assume that's the case. The Arachnarok was kind of deployed towards the tower side, but kind of close to the middle. Going to my side of the board, I have my big peasant mob a little bit on the left towards the marsh, but my plan is to have them move straight up the gut, try to defend the chapel and the main road, maybe grab that corpse pile that's in front of them along the way. My archers are set up to their right, and they will just be trying to give as much cover fire as possible. The trebuchet is also next to that. Really didn't have much space. We have a bit of a tight deployment zone here. I think we did only about 8 inches for deployment. And then to the right of the trebuchet is my Slayer force. They are going to be either supporting the big peasant block in the middle or trying to get into that tower and kill Frankenorc and whoever dares get in their way. So that's most of the deployment and the battlefield. We make a roll for first turn, and I believe we had to do a little bit of a Bretonnian prayer. So actually, the forces of darkness and terror will just automatically get the first turn. So on their first turn, he decides to move up his wolves and all of his fast guys to kind of set up a bit of a trap. And it's going to be an interesting one for sure. He has the wolves in front. He has a Gore Tusk like boar and a Banshee and maybe like Fellbat kind of positioned to do a response charge if I go after the wolves. It's all going on the far side, kind of where the marsh and the farm is. So he moves up and does some interesting positioning there. Other than that, his main lines kind of advance towards the middle chapel area, or like down the center of the road. His Arachnarok Spider and the Charnel Guard, which is also hosting, I believe, 2 vampire thralls, move towards the tower. It looks like these are going to be his 2 units. They're going to go for Frankenorc. Anyways, other than that, not too much interesting stuff happens. He might cast like a Dancer Macabre or something like that, but really not too much happens during the magic phase. And we go back to my first turn. I stick to my plan for the most part, folks. I have the Dwarven Slayers advance right up towards the tower side. There's a corpse pile in their way, but they aren't able to burn it on the first turn. It'll take next turn for that to happen. The peasant block that Paladin Hank is inside of will advance towards the chapel and like the center of the road. There's a corpse pile along the way for them as well, so they're going to probably stop and try to get that objective sealed up. Now, the more interesting stuff that happens for my first turn is in regards to the wolves. I decide not to have my yeomen charge them. Instead, I think the knights errant charge in, and they will clear up the wolves with relative ease. My thought process here was they're a hardy enough unit and there was enough distance that I could basically kind of position myself before my opponent would get these like counter charges they try to set up. I don't know. I kind of just looked at the distance and everything, measured it out, and I think I thought I was going to be fine, but we'll have to see if that's the case, because other than that, I'm going to do a trebuchet shot at his big ghoul block coming down the middle of the road. I think I'll flatten a couple of them, and maybe a few longbow shots go off, but I think pretty much everything's out of range on the first turn, so not too much else on our end. And I'm not going to be casting my regrowth spell because no one has died yet. So that is the end of turn 1. Well, actually, we have one little thing that also happens after my turn and my opponent's turn. We have Frankenorc. That's right, we have a third turn sequence. And unless he's in combat, he's basically going to just be sitting up in that tower for 6 turns, conjuring a portal, trying to escape to some other dimension. So while he's doing that, he'll cast random spells from his lore list, and he decided to summon a bunch of zombies, and they appeared on pretty much right in front of one of the corpse pile objectives my dwarves were heading towards. I don't think they were in combat. I know the picture might look like they are, but I think I just had to take a picture afterwards when I charged them. But yeah, basically a wall of zombies appeared thanks to Frankenorc right in front of my dwarf line heading towards the tower and another objective. So that was great. Things kind of go from bad to worse on our side, unfortunately. My opponent decides, alright, I am going to declare some charges on this far side. And instead of charging the knights, he charges the yeomen. I could have stood my ground and let him charge into the yeomen and hoped they would have lasted 1 or 2 rounds and had the knights errant kind of come in and support them on a following turn. But the problem with that is I don't think that's going to happen. What I think is going to happen is he's going to charge right into the yeomen. He's going to overrun right through them, and then he will be pretty much right on the flank of my archers or the rear of my giant peasant mob. And I really don't want that, because then I have to turn my knights errant around, and they already have a bunch of other units they're facing them, so they really can't afford to do that either. So yeah, basically the yeoman decided to retreat. He redirects the charge into the knights errant with his gore tusk, and that is the only big charge this turn. But what he'll also do is move his fellbat. I know it looks like some fat rat thing, but I can assure you it can fly. He moves his fellbat to the side of my knights errant unit, and he'll get a Dance of Macabre off and basically get that into a nice juicy charge as well. So what will happen after all of his movement and magic shenanigans is the Gore Tusk, I think, does a decent roll on its impact. It pretty much whiffs everything else, spoiler alert, but yeah, it kills 1 knight, I want to say, and the fellbat doesn't do anything, and I think I get a wound on the Gore Tusk. Basically, what ends up happening is he wins the combat by 1, I think, because of the flank charge. I might have even done, like, 2 wounds to the Gore Tusk. I remember we did everything out, and I lost the combat by 1, and the determining factor was the flank charge from the frickin' fellbat on my knight errant unit, of all things. They fail the leadership test by 1, they retreat, they get caught, they get killed. So we are off to a bad tone for the village folks of Bretonnia and their mercenary Dwarven Slayer force. The rest of my opponent's second turn was set with most of his units in the middle, like that big ghoul block.
moving up towards a fence line. I think he kind of wants to get them entrenched for the main battle that's going to happen there. His other units that didn't engage with my Knights Errant on the far side behind the church decided to kind of position themselves towards the chapel. They're going to start trying to wreck the place. The Arachnorok and the Charnel Guard with the vampires, they are heading towards the tower. I don't think they're able to get in this turn, but at the start turn 3, and again, my opponent has the first turn in the turn sequence, he'll be able to start making moves on Frankenorc. So that will be some time pressure kind of put on my side because my dwarves are stalled up by the zombies, and they're dwarves, so they're not really the fastest thing in the world. Yeah, we gotta hustle here if we want to get any of these objectives. Turn 2 is not quite as exciting for the Bretonnians and the dwarves. My dwarves charge the zombies. I don't even think any Slayer gets killed. It's just an absolute slaughter. They're just chopped down in one clean turn of dwarven fury. Additionally, long-drawn Slayers, I felt like it would be a bit overkill having them get involved in that combat. I had them move up. Unfortunately, they couldn't burn the corpse pile next to them because they needed to sprint. But I had them move up as much as possible to get into that tower and start contesting the Frankenorc objective. On the opposite side of the board, my yeomen automatically rally because they're fast cav. They kind of just turn about face. I think they might get a lucky wound in on the Gore Tusk with a bow shot. Additionally, my archers shoot a volley at the Gore Tusk, and I think they also get a wound. So it's got like one wound left. Maybe one of the units didn't get a wound in, but I know it's basically on one wound at this point. Anyways, other than that, Paladin Hank and his peasant mob destroy the corpse pile in front of them and continue to move towards the chapel for the main engagement in the center of the board. And that's really about it. Oh, and my trebuchet gets a very lucky shot on the Arachnorok spider, dealing about 4 wounds, I want to say, putting it at about half health. So I guess, you know, we had a bit of misfortune with those Knights Errant, but I can't be upset at that great trebuchet shot. For the magic this phase, I believe Frankenorc tried to conjure up another horde of undead. It is either going to be blocked this turn or a spell's going to be blocked next turn. But at some point, when he resurrects the next, or summons the next group of zombies, it'll actually appear on my opponent's side of the board. Because no one was controlling Frankenorc, we kind of did it a bit more randomly as to like where spells and stuff would go off. We figured that would be the most fair thing to do. So that was kind of lucky. One swarm appeared on my side, the next one appeared on my opponent's side. He'll have a unit of dire wolves try to deal with that during his upcoming turn. Speaking of which, it's now my opponent's turn, and something very interesting happens. The Arachnorok spider decides to charge Frankenorc. They seem to be saying, screw trying to capture Frankenorc, we're killing him. So, you know, I guess that's something you can't really plan for. I mean, I guess we shouldn't say that. I did have, like, some stuff for that, but I was thinking, the incentive of getting Frankenorc on your side would be too juicy. They're definitely going to go for it. At some point, I think my opponent and his teammate will consider that, but the problem becomes I have those Dwarf Slayers and other units nearby, and if they get Frankenorc on their side, I could always end up charging him and killing him and kind of stealing most of the points from that objective at the very end there. So I think that might have been another thing that deterred them from trying to get him to join their side. But anyways, he charges in with the Arachnorok. His unit of beastmen failed to charge, but they do enter into the building. Or I shouldn't say beastmen, sorry. The Charnel Guard with 2 Stigori Vampires charge into the tower and try to get Frankenorc and fail to charge. Other than that, he has the Gore Tusk and pretty much all of his fast-moving units split off and not charge me. Instead, they decide to go into the chapel and deal as much damage as possible. To be honest, I think this is a pretty good play, just because I only have the yeomen readily available at this moment. Maybe they'll kill the Gore Tusk, but yeah, that chapel's worth a lot of points, and the peasant mob that's supposed to defend it is on the opposite side of the building, and there's pretty much no chance of them getting over to that side, so it's going to be an issue. Additionally, during this turn, my reinforcements, the Knights of the Realm, have finally arrived, and on my opponent's side, his Graveguard and the zombie with the vampire, they're also going to arrive. You can see I brought my Knights in to kind of deal with that left flank that the Knights Errant got chewed up on, and they decided to bring their force down the center of the road to reinforce the main battle line that's about to engage with the peasants and Paladin Hank. Don't think it was the most eventful magic phase. We were allowing my opponent to use Invocation to resurrect a couple of ghouls, just because it's something that you can do in the 8th edition book, so we kind of figured why not. I also think the Stigori bloodline is probably the hardest to play out of all the ones in the old 6 books, so we figured this might give them a little bit of a boost. Anyways, he heals a couple of his ghouls moving up the middle of the road. I think he lost a few of them to a trebuchet shot. And he does about 5 wounds to the chapel with all of his units that charge in. So already at about half health, and that's not good for us. That's a lot of victory points if he can get that in the next turn. Oh, something a little funny. The 5 ghouls that he resurrected came at the cost of, I believe, 3 Graveguard due to a miscast. So a little bit of a magical misplay, you could say. I don't know if that was quite worth it, but we'll find out. He does manage to get his hounds into combat with the zombies. It's a quick combat. The direwolves, I think, get like +1 strength on the charge, so that really helps out. Chews up about 5 or 6 of the zombies. I don't even think they can get a single hound, and the rest of them just crumble to the combat res. So, good little combat for them. Similar performance to the Slayers across the board, also dealing with some rogue zombies. The final big combat to make note of during my opponent's turn, the Frankenorc Spider versus Frankenorc. The Spider charges in, and I think gets just barely an extra initiative point on Frankenorc, because we house roll +1 initiative on the charge, because it's very underwhelming in 8th edition otherwise. Anyways, it lets loose a salvo of attacks. I think it has like 7 attacks. It has a venomous surge. And it does 1 wound and really whiffs its attack. And Frankenorc readies his powerful claw. He rolls a d3 to see how much extra strength he gets. I think he gets only +1 this turn. But he manages to sneak a wound in. And it's a little concerning for the spider. I know the photo shows like 3 little wound tokens there. I only took 1 photo during that duel, and it's epic, and spoiler alert, it's going to happen for a couple of turns. So I'll just kind of be referring to that photo a couple of times. You'll just have to trust me on the narration as to like what point we're at in terms of the duel and how many wounds each of them have. So at this point, the spider's got like 4 or 5 wounds on it, and Frankenorc's only taken 1, surprisingly. Now that it's the 3rd turn, my knights are finally ready and able, and they charge into not the Gore Tusk, but actually a Banshee that's right in front of the Gore Tusk. I actually forgot to mention this, apologies. The Banshee went over there, did a scream attack on my yeoman. Good play on my opponent's part, but unfortunately Paladin Hank was close by and could share the leadership at that time. I also think he rolled like a total of a 5 or something. So the way the Banshee works is you roll 2d6 and you add 2 to the number. So yeah, his total was 5, and it was rather low, so no dice on the Banshee. Now she's getting charged by the knights. Might as well go over it now, too. She won't deal any wounds to my knights, and will just crumble to the combat res. I'm going to overrun into the Gore Tusk, and basically my hope is that I'm just going to go 1 unit after another with that Night Train and be able to clear the backside of that chapel before it burns down. Time is really of essence, though, and I didn't really think they were going to be dealing as many wounds as they did so quickly, so I don't really know if that's actually going to happen as quickly as I hope, but we'll see. Anyways, my yeoman did reposition and take a couple of wild shots at the ghoul unit that's positioned behind the Gore Tusk. I think they maybe get 1 wound on him, nothing too exciting. I didn't really want to have them charge into that. I just kind of thought it would be a bad combat for them, even though they do have spears. I also figured if I keep them on the side there, they are kind of a contingency in case the Stigori unit decides to charge my knights. Then they can do a counter charge afterwards and all that stuff. Anyways, the middle of the board, Paladin Hank finally decides to sally forth. He charges into the ghoul block that is positioned behind a fence now. The photos just from a little bit earlier, they are up against the fence now. Additionally, my Slayer unit to the side of Paladin Hank's unit will charge them as well, so it's a combined charge. The Long-Drawn Slayer and my Doomseeker are going to charge into the building at the Charnel Guard and Vampires that failed their charge. And that combat's going to go pretty well. But before that happens, we have not really much of a magic phase. Again, there's really not much for Paladin Hank to regrowth at this point. The Knights Errant died, but I lost the entire unit, so I can't really resurrect them. And I really just haven't lost like one or two guys in like certain situations. It's kind of all or nothings at this point. So no magic. The Trebuchet takes a shot, and I put the 4 next to it there to tell us that it misfired, and it will not be able to shoot next turn as well. So that's unfortunate. Other than that, the Longbows take a couple of wild shots, I think, at a encroaching zombie block, or maybe it was the Grave Guard. One of them was in range, and I really didn't have many other targets, so I figured go for it. I plucked off like 1 from a lucky volley. That's about it. Moving on to the close combat with the Doomseekers and Long-Drawn Slayers. The Doomseeker kicks butt. It gets, I think, 6 wounds or something like that through on the Charnel Guard and just tears them apart. Long-Drawn's boys do okay. I'd say they get like another 2 or 3 wounds, something like that in there. Nothing too crazy. I talked to my opponent about this afterwards, but basically he does all his attacks, and he has both of his heroes direct the attacks on the Doomseeker. And the Doomseeker gives him -1 to hit because he's got these like chain axes flailing all about. He does manage to kill it, but I don't know. He lost the combat. He ends up running out of the building. I decide to stay in the building because I want to get up to the objective, Frankenorc on the top floor. So his unit does manage to scuttle away, but he was talking about it afterwards, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if it was right to put all the attacks on the Doomseeker. You probably could have done a lot more damage to Long-Drawn's boys. I think he does kill like 6 of them, but yeah. Anyways, I do end up winning the combat. They run out, and now I'm not in the worst position in the world to get Frankenorc. Speaking of which, we now go to Frankenorc's phase. He decides to cast a very important spell this turn. It's his supercharged spell. They'll give him +1 to pretty much all of his stat line other than wounds. And even though it doesn't give him +1 wound, it will heal 1 wound. And at this point, I think he's only taken about 1 wound, so that's nice. And then the stat line boost will kind of ensure that he's probably going to kill this Arachnorok spider. So my opponents throw all their dice at it. They manage to dispel it. And Frankenorc goes for round 2 with the Arachnorok. The Arachnorok gets a 6 on its Venomous Surge attack. This is huge. Deals multiple wounds. My opponent, of course Frankenorc fails his save as well. My opponent rolls to see how many wounds it does. And rolls a 1. Now he does also get another normal wound through. So now Frankenorc's at 3 wounds, but it probably could have ended right then and there if he just got a little bit better luck on that multiple wound Venomous Surge attack. Frankenorc retaliates, and I remember the roll well. Got like +3 strength, so he's at strength 7 right now because his claw, at the start of every combat, you roll a d3, you add it, and yeah, so you got the max result. Hits 3 times, rolls to wound, and rolls triple 1s, and the spider lucks out and gets to go for another round against Frankenorc. And on that note, will be the start of turn 4 for my opponents, and they will have to make a very tough decision. I guess it's not really too tough, it's pretty obvious. They could try and like get someone up there and try to get Frankenorc on their side, or I don't know, have the spider try to talk some sense into Frankenorc, but those Slayers are right underneath them. They're on the floor literally right underneath, so I think it's pretty clear that they have to defeat Frankenorc right here and right now if they want those victory points. Other than that, his Charnel Guard with his 2 Vampire Thralls do manage to rally. The combat in the middle that he had the ghouls involved with. I forgot to mention this before I moved on to my opponent's turn. He managed to get like 1 wound on the Slayers and maybe 1 or 2 of the peasants, but the Charnel Guard just run away. Because he had the Grave Guard and the zombie block positioned kind of right behind his ghoul unit that I just made flee, I didn't want to pursue and then get countercharged during their turn that's coming up. So I kind of just stood my ground and held a solid battle line ready to go. But yeah, now that we're back at his turn, those ghouls do manage to rally. They turn about face. They kind of get in position with the Grave Guard and the zombies. And now they've got an appropriate battle line ready to go and face my men. The other big thing that happens during their turn is luck out with their attacks on the chapel. I think he has the zombie unit or one of the units of direwolves that came on with their reinforcements basically charge into the chapel. They have just enough extra hitting power there to burn the place down. And don't be concerned, we were quite safe with our pyrotechnics there. But yes, the chapel has been destroyed tragically, and my opponents just got 500 victory points. So I think at this point that they have a solid lead. They get points for every wound they do to Frankenorc. They get points for that chapel they just destroyed. I think I've gotten 3 of the corpse piles at this point. So, like, yeah. I think that they have the edge currently. You only have one really big combat to talk about this turn, and that is round 3 with Frankenorc versus the Arachnorok Spider. And I gotta say, I don't think I can capture how cinematic a battle this really was, folks. We roll the dice. I should say, they both roll the dice at the same time because they have equal initiative and attack at the same time. The Arachnorok Spider manages to just barely chip in the final wounds needed to kill Frankenorc. Frankenorc rolls his saves, and he fails them. A historical moment. Something I have not seen in 5 years of tabletop gaming on the Hallows Eve. Frankenorc has never fallen, and it seems it took an Arachnorok Spider to take him down. Granted, it was a little bit wounded by a trebuchet rock before this combat happened. But anyways, though Frankenorc had fallen, he had but a little bit of life left in him, and attacked at the same time. His claw, fully powered and ready to go, surges forward at the spider's face and rips its brain clean out. I don't think it was enough juice to save Frankenorc. Maybe it was. He kind of starts gobbling it up for its energy before he keels over and seems to pass out. But I think that was the end of Frankenorc for now, folks. We'll find out next Halloween. But man, you're kind of a certified badass taking down an Arachnorok Spider with you right before you go. I don't think you can argue against that. That's why I say I really don't think I can capture how epic a battle this was. 3 rounds going back to back with these 2 titans. And in the end, they both take each other down. Just too cool. Too cool. And it was just what the dice gave us and the story that the dice gave us. Awesome game. So fun, man. Anyways, moving on to the Bretonnian turn and the Dwarven allies, of course. Our main battle lines clash. The Slayers, Paladin Hank, they clash with the rallied ghouls, their zombie reinforcements. Additionally, I had the Grail Knights come in on this far right flank instead of helping the main Knights of the Realm block. I figured they could kind of sneak in here since they're only 3 wide. And they decide to charge in as well and support their comrades. Quite an inspiring sight, I'm sure, for the peasants. Additionally, long-drawn Slayers, hear the commotion on the top floor of the tower. These 2 titans keel over, and they figure their stunty dwarf legs were just not enough to get them there in time. They are too late. And they decide that's not an excuse to miss out on the remainder of this battle. They go out of the tower and they decide to get some vengeance on that unit that stalled them up from seeking their ultimate glory. During the magic phase, my Paladin Hank finally has an opportunity to cast Regrowth. Long-drawn Slayers have lost about 4 or 6 of their guys. I cast the spell, and I get Irresistible Force. A little concerning. I don't want Paladin Hank to get sucked into the warp on his first game. However, he instead just rolls the second worst result and decides to blow up, I think, like 10 of his peasants or something like that. However, I do roll the dice and I get the maximum result for the resurrection on Londron's boys. I think I resurrect 4 of them. And that's really going to help out for the combat that they're about to be in. Round 2 with the Charnel Guard and the Vampires. So, that's good. The Trebuchet is unable to shoot this turn. And the longbows kind of just continue to get some cheeky shots in every now and then. On the far side, I don't really have any photos of it, but the Night Train just continues to go into one unit, to the next unit, to the next unit. For some reason, his Strigani unit has kind of just continued to reposition. I don't know if they're trying to get the flank of my unit or something like that, or if they're just kind of deterred from going into that combat because they know they won't win, or I have those yeomen nearby. But yeah, they kind of are dancing around and not really charging in yet. And the Knights of the Realm are just kind of cleaning up the remnants of the burned up church area. So yeah, that's about it for my turn. Moving on to the close combats of my turn, though. The big clash is a bit of a slaughter. The Graveguard haven't made it in yet, mainly because it's my turn and I got to do the charges and all that stuff. So yeah, I think I lose a couple of peasants, maybe 1 or 2 of the Slayers, but to a ghoul. Other than that, though, it's a cleanup, and we basically just get to reposition and prepare for the upcoming charges that the undead are going to have on us. I know that Paladin Hank's unit's probably going to get the main attention for their phase, and I'm kind of just hoping he can survive 1 round of combat, and then the Slayers can come in, support them, and clean everything up. And same with the Grail Knights there near them as well, but we'll see if that ends up happening. Pretty good turn for us, though. Yeah, my opponent got that objective, and that was a lot of points, but he also lost the Arachnorok Spider in the process. It definitely a net positive, no argument about that, but he's also lost, like, a zombie block at this point. I stopped them from casting an invocation. I think they tried to get one off and maintain their numbers, but no such luck. They lose their zombie block, they've lost a ghoul unit. The Charnel Guard unit's taken 2 bad combats with Londron and a Doomseeker, even though the Doomseeker's dead at this point. But yeah, they're starting to get really chipped down here, and it's coming down to the last couple of guys on their side. So we'll have to see if they can maintain their numbers, because if they can, they definitely have a huge lead from all these victory points they've gained. I still have 1 more corpse pile too, and spoiler alert, I am not really going to be able to get it. I will be too concerned with combats and stuff that are happening on the board, and there won't really be enough time left in the game to nab it before it ends. So that's unfortunate, but anyways, moving on to the start of my opponent's turn. During my opponent's turn, he's going to have his Graveguard and a unit of Direwolves that was finishing up destroying the church, basically go into the flank and the front of Paladin Hank's unit. Then, one of the Vampire Lord, the Stigori Vampire Beast Lord, flies over my unit and will charge into the rear if he gets a Dance of Macabre spell off, of course, which he has. And he's been doing them quite a bit, and he's been doing them quite effectively, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening. But yeah, basically, Paladin Hank's unit is getting swarmed. They have a good chance of being steadfast and kind of being able to tank this, but definitely a little bit nervous for that unit. They are peasants. They don't really have any buffs or anything. They do have a character, but yeah, we'll see what happens. Other than that, the zombies and ghouls that were kind of part of that main battle line, the ghouls pretty much got obliterated. He still had a couple of zombies alive. He tries to cast an invocation to resurrect some of the zombies and heal some of his Graveguard. It was a pretty juicy heal, so when it comes to the magic phase, I decided to block that instead of the Dance of Macabre. You could say that was the wrong choice, but I think it was. I figured, yeah, the Vampire Lord is going to charge in, the rear charge, maybe get 3 or 4 wounds. Like, definitely, I'm not going to win this combat res. There's no doubt about it. It's more a matter of, am I going to be able to be steadfast or not? And if I let this invocation get off, that's going to heal some of these Graveguard back and give them a rank or two. And I don't really have the best of chances of dealing with them, so I don't know. I figured this was the right call. Block that spell. He does get the dance off. The vampire goes into my rear of the unit, which is definitely not good. But the zombies are finished off by the Grail Knights and the Dwarven Slayers, and those two units will reposition to aid Paladin Hank in that combat, hopefully. So, going into that combat, since that's kind of one of the few big things left in this game, the vampire in the Graveguard unit decides to challenge Paladin Hank to a duel. It wasn't the Lord that decided to do it, was the hero. And I thought that was interesting. As much as I want Paladin Hank to just smack those wolves on the flank, he can do a make way and go over there. I have to accept this challenge or I'll lose the blessing of the lady. Plus, if I move him to the rear and deny the challenge, I think the Vampire Lord will just be able to hit me, so it really doesn't solve many of my issues. So I decided to accept the challenge. The vampire swings her sword. I believe this was the one that Aberon the Decapitator fought in my prior battle report. She's pretty good. She's got like a sword striking, enchant shield. She's definitely meant for combat, all that stuff. She's got a better profile than a paladin as well, even without all of her magic gear. Anyways, she swings her sword. Gets, I think, 2 or 3 wounds. Old Hank lingers in. He passes 1 or 2 of his saves or a ward save. He takes 1 wound. It does not get killed. Oh, thank goodness. He swings back, and again, he's kind of got the worst stat line of the two, and somehow manages to get 3 wounds through on the Vampire Thrall. And I'm like, oh my god, is he gonna win this? Nope, no such luck. She passes all of her armor saves, aces it. So this is a character we gotta make note of. She seems like quite the duelist. She's had 2 good performances so far. The next to swing in the combat, since the duel's all done, is the Vampire Lord. He gets, I think, 4 wounds, tears apart 4 peasants in the rear. However, surprisingly, one of the peasants turns around and manages to stab the vampire and get a wound in on him. So I was surprised about that. Dire Wolves chip in a wound or 2. I might get one of the wolves. I do get one of the Graveguard as well, so I'm happy about that. But Graveguard swing last. They've got great weapons, and they tear apart like 5 or 6 more of the peasants. We go to the combat res. It's not absolutely terrible, and I am steadfast. I roll the dice, fail the leadership test. We had a brief moment of debating if my Dwarven ally BSB right next to the unit would allow me to re-roll it, because if it did, I would have passed it. But I think that was a little cheeky, a little cheesy, and we 4-upped it anyways, and Dice God said no such luck, and my peasant unit fled. They were chopped down or scattered. I don't know what happened to old Hank. He did okay on his first game. He resurrected some guys. Bit of a blood tax on that resurrection, and he held his own in the duel. So I'm not really too upset with him. Smacked a couple of ghouls as well, but yeah, unfortunately, we don't really know what happened to him after the battle. We'll have to find out some other time soon. The Graveguard decided to hold and reposition. His wolves overrun, and they're the ones that caught the peasants. I believe the Vampire Lord joined in on that, and that'll put them in an interesting spot where they are right in front of my peasant bowmen, so I'm going to get like 1 or 2 good volleys in, and if I can't take them down, it's all over for those bowmen. And yeah, the Graveguard are ready to face the charge of the Slayers and Grail Knights, which will be happening during my turn. I don't believe the Strigani charged. As I mentioned earlier, they're kind of just preparing for the inevitable, I suppose. The last thing to make note of during my opponent's turn here, even though I can't remember what exactly stalled up the Charnel Guard with the Vampire Thralls embedded in the unit, I think they either failed a leadership test or just like kept running. I don't know what it was. They did rally this turn. They couldn't do any charges because of it, but they do get a reposition. Also, if you were curious about how the vampires in the unit of ghouls, even though they are alive in the 6th edition book, we decided to let it happen, but basically he'll also be tied leadership-wise, so like he'll run with the unit, so it's not necessarily a good thing, but he will be able to kind of tag along with them and not get sniped out, so that's nice. So this is going to be the final turn of the battle report here, folks, and it's a bit of an eventful one. My archers, who are led by another one of my D&D characters, a halfling named Rufus Shortwick of the Montague clan. He's just the champion of the unit, nothing special at all, but it's just like, it's a D&D figure and stuff. Anyways, he and the unit take aim, and he has trained them well at the vampire leader. He's got a bit of cover, because he's got those wolves screening in front of him. And their arrows shoot true. They managed to get at least one, if not two wounds in. He might not have been a vampire lord. He might have actually just been a thrall, but we let him spend a couple of extra points on it. I mentioned that earlier to make your characters a bit cooler, but yeah, so he might have only had 2 wounds, but we cheek it in. The vampire falls, and that is a huge boon for our side. Additionally, the Knights of the Realm and the Yeomen decide to charge the questionable decisions of the Stigori on the other side. They're kind of sitting there waiting for the inevitable, and it happened. We charged in, and they're going to get cleared up. I think they kill one of the Knights and maybe a Yeoman before they part from the mortal planes, but yeah, quick combat over there. Additionally, the Slayers and the Grail Knights combined charge the Graveguard with the Vampire Hero embedded in there, and that combat goes pretty well. We clear them up. They managed to kill a couple of my Slayers before the game ends. I think about 3 of them, which is nice. Good couple of extra points for them to nab. And then the final thing to make note of is the Trebuchet and Long Drawn Slayers let loose a combined salvo of fire upon the remaining Charnel Guard with the Vampire Thralls, the ones that I'm not sure what they were stalled up doing, but we flattened a good chunk of them. And I do feel kind of bad, we didn't realize this till like afterwards. Me and my opponent were talking about it. It was a total whoopsie moment. Long Drawn Slayers got an amazing volley on them, and I forgot that they were skirmishers, so I should have had a -1 to hit there. But I think the game is pretty much over at this point anyways. And it's not like I killed any of his heroes, only a couple of the Charnel Guard. But yeah, that was definitely a mistake, and feel bad about that one. Anyways, after the combats concluded and the Vampire and the Graveguard either fled or fell from the battlefield, there really wasn't many undead left. It was just those 2 Vampire Thralls and 1 or 2 of the Charnel Guard remaining. I think even the Hounds crumbled away that were in front of my archers. And maybe 1 or 2 of the Stigori were left. I don't think so, though. I think that unit was killed. And the battle was concluded. And a serious tally of victory points needed to be done after this one. Because even though there's a good amount of my troops still remaining on the battlefield here, and my opponents did kind of lose most of their numbers on the final turn or 2 here, they did get a lot of the objectives. The only thing they could have gotten more points on objective-wise was maybe stopping me from burning one of the corpse piles or 2, but there's still 1 of those remaining, and they got all the points from Frankenorc. Yeah, they didn't bring him back alive, but they did kill him and do all the wounds, so that's a hefty chunk of points, and they also burned the chapel. So, the final tallies are done. And the scores are a little bit closer than you might think, folks. The basics of it are, I came out with 1,197 points still left on the battlefield. So they killed about 800, 900 points of my guys. Not bad. And I secured 450 points of objectives. Pretty good for me. The other side, though, 1,200 points from just their objectives, and that's also factoring the corpse pile that I left on the board there. Unfortunately, though, they only had about like 200 point-ish units left on the board, maybe a little bit more. Basically, they came out to about 1,400, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less points. And yeah, I only had about a 150, 200 point lead on these guys at the end of the game. So I believe, at least according to the book, the campaigns that I've been running, I kind of had a little system built in for deciding if it's a heroic victory, normal victory, or a draw. I believe this is actually technically a draw, but my opponents kind of felt like I got the victory at the end of the day here. I like to think that those 2 Vampire Thralls and the remaining Charnel Guard maybe were able to scavenge up Frankenorc's body and scurry away with it at the end of the day, and not have their tails completely tucked between their legs. And yeah, I mean, the Bretonnians lost their chapel, and they lost the glory of slaying Frankenorc. So those were some two big moral blows to their faction. But anyways, folks, don't have much time left, unfortunately, to be working on this video. Family's been calling, and seasons are changing. Holidays are coming. We'll be coming back to you soon, maybe in a week, maybe a little bit longer, with some more hobby videos, or perhaps another battle report. We'll see. Regardless, I hope you liked this video. Thought it was a fun, custom little scenario we came up with. You liked the Frankenorc model we had, and our Paladin Hank. I definitely like Paladin Hank. I think he's pretty cool. It's kind of a prototype. I plan on making another one soon. I'll share some details about that project soon enough. And yeah, anyways, I hope you all have a happy Halloween. Stay safe. Make sure you do go out there, though, and have some fun and enjoy yourselves in the season. Only comes around so many times. And let me know if you have any traditions that you like to do around this season, especially if there's any tabletop games that you like to run around the fall. I've had Frankenorc appear in Gorka Morka games, 40k games, possibly a Star Wars Legion game before. That's kind of the fun of those portals he opens up. He can appear in any game. You never know when Frankenorc's going to show up. So make sure you watch your back on Halloween night, because you never know if there's going to be a Frankenorc. Goodbye, folks. Love you all. Happy Halloween.